Good morning, Grizzlies. So yesterday, we found out that Jimmy, Teresa, Rocky's father, and Moose's father had been reported and written up and put on probation for something that they said didn't happen. And the question is, who would have set them up for that? And Natalie is also coming home for a visit, and they don't want to mess anything up. So, chapter 20. Welcome home, Natalie. Friday, September 6th, 1935. Nat and my parents are supposed to be on the 4 o'clock ferry. Teresa, Jimmy, and I are all down waiting for her. Teresa has made a sign, Welcome home, Natalie. It says in pencil with glued on buttons. My mom got a store-bought lemon cake and I borrowed some of Jimmy's fly harness thread and made Natalie a bracelet. Scout be over this weekend? Jimmy asks as we watch a large fishing boat scoot across the calm water, making a perfect wake, 2 white lines in the blue. Nope. You going to Scouts? Jimmy freezes, waiting for my answer. Nope, I say. Jimmy's head dips down. I don't see him smile, but his dimple is showing. You should see how many flies I have now. Maybe 50,000. 50,000 flies? No kidding, I ask, scratching my leg, which is driving me crazy. I hope the hives aren't coming back. Jimmy nods. They move around so much it's hard to count. Think Natalie could do it? If anyone can count 50,000 flies, it's Natalie. Jim's brown eyes are full of excitement. That's what I figured. You find out any more about who got our dads on probation? I ask. My mom thinks it's Piper, Jimmy says. Everybody thinks it's Piper. Teresa chimes in. Piper wouldn't do anything that bad. Teresa and Jimmy look at each other. You gotta talk to her, Jimmy says. Why me? You're the one who told her about the secret crawl space. Jimmy scoffs. From what I heard, you didn't seem to mind too much. I look at Teresa. You weren't going to tell anyone, remember? Jimmy isn't anyone, Teresa informs me. Jimmy snorts. Thanks, Teresa, he says. Oh, look, Natalie's coming. Teresa points at the ferry, which is headed toward us, a flock of birds flying above it. The boat is steaming across the water. The sun is shining through the clouds, making the wake sparkle. My dad is handsome in his officer's uniform. My mom is wearing her good green coat. Nat is sitting with her head down like she's reading. From a distance, they look normal. Your dad talked to the warden? Jimmy asks as Mr. Madaman, who is acting buck sergeant, jumps on the dock. He still has the same duties when he's on probation. They just check on him all the time, like he's a junior officer again. I don't know, but he's not worried. He thinks it was only a mistake. Jimmy shakes his head. You're just like your dad, you know that? He snips. What's that supposed to mean? I ask as my father carries Natalie's suitcase with Natalie Flanagan written on all sides. He's kidding around with her, pretending to drop her suitcase in the bay. My mother doesn't like this. I can tell by the way her hands are on her hips that she's bawling him out. Natalie says something to my dad that makes him laugh all the more. He hands her back her suitcase. Hey, kids, Mr. Madaman comes up behind us. Trixel is up in the guard tower. Natalie and my dad come across the gangplank. Natalie is not looking down at her feet like she usually does. She's focused out to the left, her shoulders slumped as she toe walks across the gangplank. Nat has just crossed through the metal detector when it buzzes loud as an air raid siren. My mother's back gets stiff as a wheel rod. Her face looks feverish. She stares at Natalie. Nat's completely quiet, almost like she doesn't hear. She digs her chin in her collarbone. Cam? Trixel bellows through the bullhorn from the guard tower. Madaman will need to search the suitcase. I know Trixel is itching to do it himself, but he's not allowed to leave the guard tower. My dad waves to Trixel. Of course, he says, but when he tries to take Nat's suitcase from her, she won't let go. Probably afraid he'll drop it in the bay. My mom whispers to her. Must have some metal buttons in that button box of hers, my dad tells Mr. Madaman. Riv Madaman smiles kindly. He whispers something in Natalie's other ear. Natalie doesn't look back at him, but I can tell by the angle of her head that she's listening. When he's finished, her shoulders relax down an inch or two. She hands Mr. Madaman the suitcase, and my mother's smile is big enough to cover 3 or 4 faces. I can't help feeling proud of Natalie. First, she didn't scream when the snitch box went off, and now she hands over her suitcase without a problem. I know she knows her buttons are in there, but still, she lets go. Mr. Madaman seems to be explaining something to her. She cocks her head as if she's thinking about this, nods, and then plunks herself down on the wooden dock right where she is. He kneels on one leg, clicks open the suitcase, and he and Natalie lean over to look inside. Mr. Madaman puts his hand on Nat's button box. He is clearly asking her if it's okay for him to look inside. My father and Mr. Madaman confer. Mr. Madaman nods and holds the button box out to Natalie. Natalie picks out a half-dozen buttons, and Mr. Madaman waves the all clear to Trixel in the guard tower. We're all set here, Darby. A handful of metal buttons is all. He leans down to help Natalie buckle her suitcase shut. My father rubs his hands together. All righty then, back in business, Nat. Natalie is coming home, Nat says. A tiny smile flashes across her face, bright as a falling star. Yes, you are, Sweet Pea, my dad says. Yes, you are.